Welcome back to Catastrophic Disclosure. We're here in Huntsville, Alabama, home of the U.S. Space and Rocket Center.
And hub of UFO research on Earth.
And we just spent the entire weekend interviewing some of the world's leading disclosure figures here in Rocket City.
1 year after Dave Grush's congressional hearing, Disclosure entered a new era of unique progress and setbacks. We set out on a journey to learn firsthand.
There's an audience out there that want this stuff covered. They really do.
Hurt me, take my stuff, put me down, the whole 9 yards.
Yes, Brandon Fugel.
That's fucking weird. Dude, I'm telling you.
Chairman Colliers.
It is telling that the hottest piece of evidence we're talking about is 20 years old.
Yeah.
The cat is out of the bag. The toothpaste is out of the tube. And it's only a little bit.
Do you think any fields might lag behind?
What's the risk? If someone tried to kill me or something, I would only be afraid like after I was dead, because then that's
Yeah.
The United States government has gathered a great deal of information about UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with the American people. That is wrong, and additionally, it breeds mistrust.
I think the American people would love to know, more about what our capabilities are, and was there actually, something found at some point in the past that helped us to develop some of our technologies.
I just had this idea, along the lines of what Ross was saying about how the contractors are so vehemently against disclosure because they want to keep the IP for things they've developed.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, you could think, oh, it's because it's cold fusion, it's because it's anti-gravity, it's these transformational technologies that one might imagine are going to be worth trillions of dollars, all of this. But it just seems weird that those are hypothetical technologies that, first of all, for that to be a very realizable future expectation, we'd have to assume that the contractors have cracked all those technologies. Otherwise, they can't commercialize them anyway. So why are they worried about what they might make on it in 70 years? But the other way of looking at reverse engineering, the other sort of perspective on it, is you hear people say, Roswell's the first time we ever saw carbon fiber. Roswell's the first time we ever saw microelectronics. Yeah. And so there's this side of reverse engineering that suggests that, in point of fact, reverse engineered technologies of unknown origin are not, in fact, all that unknown looking, that they represent things that we've taken to accept as prosaic human technologies, microelectronics, fiber optics, masers, the bipolar transistor, carbon fiber, like I said.
What's interesting is, when I think of eminent domain, I always think about the physical materials, right?
Right.
But then I realized that also includes the IP.
It does. Yeah.
Right, the intellectual property.
The issue is, who controls the information? Who controls the data? Who controls the intellectual property?
It really does paint this picture. Maybe some of these contractors don't even have the entire craft, the entire material anymore. Maybe they're holding on to this hoard of IP.
Right.
For decades-old IP.
And it could even be products that they sell right now. That's what I'm thinking of, is that, for instance, Lockheed has this proprietary, it's called an elastomeric polymer called MI15. It's a high-temperature TPS, and it's very good. And I've often speculated that they sell it off the shelf, I can go buy it. But I often wonder, what are they not selling? What have they developed in-house that they don't sell, that they only use proprietarily? So similarly, there can be things like that are very key to some of their business portfolio that are not anti-gravity reactors. They're more fundamental, they're more recognizable, and they're worth billions, and they're worried about losing them. They're worried about losing access to them. That's possible.
Those corporations don't want disclosure unless they're guaranteed the IP. If you let the cat out of the bag, the first question is, okay, who owns it?
So Thenveer, how are you feeling on the last day of this conference?
Well, we just drove by a whole plaza of aerospace companies. In fact, right over there, those buildings, it's Boeing, and right next to Boeing is Lockheed Martin. Wait, what's that? Colliers? Yo.
That's just the name of the realty agency.
Yeah, but Colliers is owned by Brandon Fugel.
Who's that?
Are you serious?
Yeah, isn't it? That's his company.
Who's Brandon Fugel?
That's his company.
Is it the same? Oh, that would be fucking weird.
Dude, hold on. Yes, Brandon Fugel.
That's fucking weird.
Dude,
I'm telling you.
Chairman Collier.
So, Brandon Fugel's company, real estate corporation, is selling or facilitating the lease of the former Aerospace Corporation building in Huntsville that Eric Davis worked at, and historically has been alleged to have been a TDA performing analysis on technologies of unknown origin and craft.
Okay, so we drove by the Aerospace Corporation where Eric Davis works, and we see that it is up for sale. Like the building is like they packed up and left. And right outside the building, we see a sign for Colliers International, which Brandon Fugel, the owner of Skinwalker Ranch, he's the chairman of that company. And so, how are all of these places connected? And did anyone know about this? Like, why is Brandon Fugel's company spearheading this move of the Aerospace Corporation, where Eric Davis works? Like, what's going on here?
What do you think are the implications of this?
These people behind the scenes are definitely doing a deliberate campaign, a deliberate series of actions together. They're all connected in some way, shape, or form, this new aviary that we like to call it.
On the subject of the weapons development programs, gaining a significant amount of momentum in developing products of real worth, there are entire organizations within the government TDA complex, the Technical Design Authority, that do scoring for development projects for these enormous, programs such as Sentinel, Next Generation Interceptor, that require a significant amount of expertise to be leveraged from within the DoD to evaluate the technical merit of individual competitors' programs when they go to compete for these multi-billion-dollar programs. And historically, I've always been convinced that there was no possible way for any of these programs of record to incorporate technology of unknown origin, because it would have required too significant of a footprint. Too many people would have to know. Too many evaluators within the IPT would have to know. The integrated product team at the government level would have to know about it. But it does seem, as we watched, for instance, the Office of Global Access and the research that we did a number of months ago, showing that there were connections between Missile Defense Agency and CIA Office of Global Access and programs that had bridged the gap from one to the other, and technologies that had keyhole technologies that had developed between one and the other. It really does look like within Army ISR programs, within Army Futures Command, Colonel Nell's former command, that there are significant program developments going on that could have to do with the mobilization of technologies of unknown origin for weaponization along the lines of some breakthroughs having occurred in the last 15 years. And this could possibly dovetail with, the allegations that Danny Sheehan has made from his connections at Radiance and elsewhere, which were echoed again to me by Mr. Garrison, as we discussed today. And I think really speak to the possibility that even if there is not tangible material progress on UAPDA at a political level, it might be the case that they're involving too many people in the research to keep this quiet for much longer.
So let's take a look at the data. So we can look at some folks that have very high level access to information, like Paul Hellyer, who was the defense chief for Canada, has come out and said the same thing. We can look at Ham Eshed, the head of Israel's, or former head of Israel's Space Force, has said the same thing. Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intel, SAPCO, has essentially said the same thing. Lou Elizondo has said the same thing. David Grush has said the same thing. David Grush cleared for presidentially level material. So you're looking at people that are in a position to know this, and they're telling you the same thing. You could take a look at the Gang of Eight in the Senate and in Congress.
My question for you is, can we expect to see you do anything with Colonel Carl Nell?
Oh, believe me, I'd love to interview Carl Nell. I'm hoping, yes, I'd love to do a story with him. I think he's an extraordinary character, an exemplary former, military serviceman. And he's got a very interesting story to tell. So yeah, I'd love to interview Karina.
So we got to speak with Ross Coulthart again after initially meeting him at the Seoul Symposium, and he actually remembered some of the conversations that we had with him at Stanford, and the fact that he follows you on Twitter and that he reposted some of your tweets. But the conversation we had with him today turned super interesting when we started discussing some of the deeper details about his keynote speech.
Yeah, Ross really came out swinging about halfway through. He had kind of some boilerplate content that he talks about in every one of his talks, but he really he hit on some new information throughout the presentation. He talked about comments that were made to him by aerospace executives that he's never discussed before. He talked about and named a former U.S. Naval S&T R&D executive level individual in government that disclosed the existence of a reverse engineering program to him before his death, and that'll be in the SCU discussion, in the videos that they post. He talked about a lot of new information to do with, he made this really interesting comment: if I were to end up thrown under a bus, all of the list of names of people I've ever talked to will get published internationally by a lot of different people.
Yeah.
Alluding to the existence of some kind of
dead man switch.
Networked dead man switch between all of the names that you hear thrown around within Seoul and the Aviary and the Invisible College and all these things. He really seemed, there was this transition in his talk where he went almost from the teleprompter to off the teleprompter. It was really interesting, and I think that when people see it, I think it's going to be very revelatory.
What I am told are retrieved non-human craft. There are even allegations that we are bringing down these craft offensively, using weapons. And I know that sounds crazy. I'm telling you what I am being told. If these claims are true, then we have acted reprehensibly with a non-human intelligence in our avaricious effort to be the first to secure an advantage with their technology. It's a moral stain on what should be one of the greatest moments in human history, first contact.
Yeah, when we got a chance to pull him aside and have discussions, he made additional comments about some of his points of interest, and we got into more of the nuanced details of why the military-industrial complex is so central in maintaining the cabal of secrecy and what they're afraid of losing if it were to come out. And I got a chance to talk to him a little bit about this, and I think it'd be really interesting to look at the case for dividing and breaking the voting bloc amongst the defense contractors and finding a way to turn some of them into allies to commercialize the technology that they've got, because surely they have the opportunity to do so much more with it with an open door to government than the current closed doors that they have.
That's so interesting that in your information, despite 75 years of reverse engineering, the military hasn't really made the kind of breakthroughs that have altered the geostrategic landscape.
And we're trying to make inferences, right? So we don't see anything that's obviously extraterrestrial in nature. And so we go, they must not have been successful. So I often wonder if the secrecy is preventing commercialization. So I've wondered if there might not be allies within private industry, because you would think that they stand to make much more money if the secrecy is dropped. That's what I wonder.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But as you said, there could be this internal squabble about who gets to hold the IP. And we were talking about the prospect that multiple contractors have made similar advances on multiple different pieces, and so maybe they're even fighting with each other, not just with the federal government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And one of the pieces that I think was a true bombshell was in this keynote, he mentions how he talked to an aerospace executive, and they referred to the president as a temporary worker. But when he got to talking with us, he actually named the aerospace company where this aerospace executive worked. And I'm not sure if we can name that right now, but when he said that, I felt like wow, you just dropped that on us so casually.
Yeah, I mean, Ross made a special note of how important it is not to burn sources, and considering this isn't a current executive of said contractor, We probably shouldn't, in particular because apparently this individual also asked for his advice about what he should do, suggesting, a rapport and that he would take his advice. So, maybe there's an opportunity for alliances.
But maybe the last gem that Ross dropped was the fact that these aerospace companies are afraid of losing their IP. And we got into this nuanced conversation about eminent domain in the UAP Disclosure Act, and it just got me thinking. As someone who's in the UFO world and the UAP world, I think a lot about these things, a lot about the Disclosure Act, a lot about the language of it. But when I think of eminent domain, I always think about some shady companies or some big companies having access to physical materials, physical craft, and so they're afraid of eminent domain because they don't want the government coming in and taking their entire materials, entire craft. But eminent domain also refers to the IP or the intellectual property that a company may have on these technologies of unknown origin.
Ross made a very interesting comment that I don't think he's ever made before when he began speaking about the exact nature of reverse engineering and the process of it. He indicated that it's almost not like they're reverse engineering anymore, they're piggybacking the technology or they're retrofitting the technology, which suggests perhaps that maybe they've given up on trying to actually reproduce the exact exotic material and instead they're going to incorporate it into existing aeronautical systems, or they're going to perhaps put prosaic technologies on exotic vehicles and hybridize the technology. But in any case, he seemed really convinced that there is an active and incredibly productive weapons development program ongoing, which of course was alleged by Danny Sheehan and the New Paradigm Institute, and suggests that there is a lot of money flowing into a couple of different contractors specifically to develop UAP weaponization programs.
Even if they don't have these materials on hand anymore, they have maybe decades and decades of learning, of research, of science that's all classified, all that IP that they're just unwilling to give up ever, even if it's hypothetical technologies, even if it's not practical. And it really makes you think, like, what is being held back from us? Because Dave Grush will frequently mention, what are the energy implications? So maybe there's something there, something real there in the IP.
A lot of that is glare that you're also getting off of the reflection. That's why it's so apparently hot, because you have to now do the sun angles off of that.
This was at night, first of all.
Okay, it was at night.
Gimbal was filmed at night. This is a basic detail about the most recognizable UAP footage in the world of all time. Most Americans have seen it at least once. How do I have to explain the most famous UAP videos to the U.S. government's UFO chief analyst?
But while the Pentagon continues to obfuscate, we caught up with the man who initially exposed their deceptive leadership.
Anthony Miller, nice to meet you. Yeah, nice to meet you. So you've gone viral earlier in the year for exposing Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick's interactions with Pentagon spokesperson Susan Goff. I'd like to ask you, what do you think of his departure from Aero and his new position at Oak Ridge National Labs?
I think that, I can't say much about his departure. I was definitely not happy with his time there. So
yeah,
I don't know what's going to come next. It does seem like a systemic issue with the organization itself, with Aero. So I don't know how much is going to change. And this position at Oak Ridge, that's just, for me, that's typical revolving door.
Miller agreed that this issue is rampant in all domains, so he wasn't surprised at Kirkpatrick's movement. But while the Pentagon decides its next move, disclosure might not have to wait.
This is the company that I started. It's called Falcon Space because my last name is Sokol, which means falcon in Russian. And the goal of Falcon Space is advancing anti-gravity technology.
Enter Falcon Space. With anti-gravity research experiencing a new renaissance, we were able to catch up with Mark Soal directly.
Well, we talked a little bit about the work they're doing at Falcon Space, and I'm really interested to hear what you think about Byfield Brown and your experience so far working with the physics involved, and what kind of results you've had actually.
Okay, so Falcon Space is primarily set up to advance the physics and understanding of these craft, and eventually our goal is to build them and mass produce them. We're in what we call stage one, where we're doing experiments based on papers that have been written. Byfield Brown is one of them. Alzafon is another one. There's inertial propulsion concepts. There's many different genres of experiments that we're running, and we're trying to see the basics, fundamental physics. Does this actually work? Does it produce the effect, the bare minimum product that can prove an end result? And from that, we can extrapolate and try to build it and take these things to the next level. And really the push behind this, not just to build a craft, but also to bring about the disclosure that we're always talking about. Because once you have the craft, there's no coming back off of that. There's no way to put that genie back in the bottle. And like as Tim mentioned, you do have these peaks and troughs. It does come back. People are taking like 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. They're being led to believe, hey, there's actually something here, but maybe it's just all smoke and mirrors. Maybe it's just somebody's lying. Or they always give us a reason to doubt it and prevent this catastrophic disclosure that everyone's worried about. That would, people would be wondering, why do I go to work in the morning? Or, what's the point in living anymore? The entire world being turned upside down. So ion winds, this is something Tim Ventura is very familiar with as well. He started off also in that genre with American Anti-Gravity, right? And high voltage electrostatic can do a lot of interesting things. Like, for instance, this countertop over here can probably take 50,000 volts without dissipating. So if you were to apply a voltage to that, to an object on top of it, you're actually electrifying plastic too. So it would repel other objects in that area. It's a really complex thing to study and look for these anomalous effects when there are known effects that you have to account for.
How do you think the study of UAP will continue? Will we have degrees in this, or will our current fields of study need a radical shift in their approach and a rewrite of their curriculum?
That's an excellent question. I mean, it's a complicated one because we don't know. UAP aren't just one thing, so we don't know what they all are, right? And so you could very well have a situation where you have UAP studies as being a field by itself for some time, but it probably will also affect other fields of science dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have some organizations like the New Paradigm Institute and others who are looking to have dedicated degrees/studies in this. You have other things like Colonel Nell's presentation, where he laid out this sort of stair-stepping disclosure campaign, and it involved getting the biological sciences, getting the policy, all the rest of academia. Do you think any fields might lag behind? For example, biologics is one of the most controversial topics when it comes to UAP. Do you think that's one of the last things that will come out in academia?
I think that there very possibly could be one of the last things. I mean, if we're just going to focus on observing UAP from a distance, then you probably are going to be limited to some of the hard sciences, physics, and maybe chemistry. But if we're going to be able to come in contact with some of these things, and if they happen to involve biologics, then biology becomes important. And because they're under intelligent control, you also are going to have This is going to impact psychology, anthropology, sociology, these fields as well. Those will be important as well.
One of the things that I think that we've been able to help encourage in the community are a lot of the ideals from Linux and the open source movement, where it's like, look, you've had 75 years, same thing as UFOs, 75 years to get there, nobody's gotten there. So what can we do differently? And one of those things is open collaboration. Right.
Hey everyone, before we continue, we're excited to introduce a new contributor to the podcast. So Karina here is a PhD student in biomedical sciences and is joining us for the annual SCU conference. So what brings you here and how did you take interest in this emerging world of UAP?
So a few weeks ago, I had no concept of UAP, UFOs, or non-human intelligence. I was solely focused on becoming a scientist. But one day, a best friend mentioned Gary Nolan, who was a well-known cancer immunologist. And funnily enough, one of the labs I worked in was focused on cancer, so I knew of his research. My friend had actually met him at the Soul Symposium at Stanford, which piqued my curiosity. That's where my journey began.
So you actually have a fascinating background because on the show we have Jack, who's a material scientist and works on hypersonics. We have Nest, who's a systems engineer and he works on satellites, and I'm a software engineer. But finally, we have someone here who can help us contextualize the biologic side of the phenomenon.
Yeah, well, as a scientist, we are addicted to the unknown. And the premise of UAPs represent the ultimate unknown. But in the community so far, I've seen a lot of terms being thrown around, like CRISPR-Cas9, genetic sequencing, divergent evolution, and gene expression in DNA. But as someone who studies cellular biology, I have practical training in some of these techniques that allow me to vet for credibility.
Exactly, and I think as disclosure trickles down through the halls of academia, we're gonna need scientists, we're gonna need engineers, we're gonna need biologists, we're gonna need economists, we're gonna need a broad slice of intellectuals to prevent a flood when the dam eventually bursts. So we're so excited to have you contribute to the show.
Well, I'm honored, and let's get started.
And enough observations like this, and it's pretty clear to all of us that there's a relationship to whatever this thing is that we're calling a brain. There's a relationship between that and whatever this thing is that we're calling consciousness.
Enter Dr. Julia Mossbridge. In the world of emerging UAP science, there's a profound connection to consciousness, and our new contributor, Karina, got a chance to connect with this towering intellect of frontier science.
It's like, what do you want to have in the world? What do you want to have in the world?
Yeah.
It's up to us, we're in the world. And that's actually the piece of science that I think is so critical, and actually something that I think UAP phenomena are trying to teach us, which is that we are in the world, we're part of this co-creation, we are part of this equation. Human insides and human outsides are both valid in terms of this phenomenon, and they're both affected by this.
Yeah.
So this human experience, our internal experience, is actually going to guide us towards understanding the externalities of the phenomenon. That's okay, that's how science is done, that's how we learn.
Exactly. And it's accepting that, you don't know everything. Because as you said, that is science. Like, I'd say, as a scientist myself, 90% is failure. And then you see the 10% in people. But I just think that my favorite saying to say to people is, tell me more. Because I want to know more. I want to understand what's out there. I want to understand other people and their experiences.
Right. And experience is real. And so they're going to say, well, but is it really real? What we're talking about is physical reality, and that's the most real thing. But actually, if you want to be really conservative about what reality is, go back to Descartes and recognize that all we know is our experience. So the physical world is a deduction. We deduce that there's a physical world based on our experience, but the first thing we have is experience. So, but somehow we flipped it completely around, and we decide that, the chair is more real than my mind.
Yeah.
But in fact, the chair comes from your mind.
Exactly.
And so it's an interesting flip, and it's now flipping back.
We're here with Micah Hanks. You are editor and co-founder of the Debrief, which has burst onto the scene along with a new crop of platforms such as the Liberation Times and News Nation for breaking every major disclosure story of the last few years. In a hypothetical world where some version of the UAP Disclosure Act passes and we begin the next stage of the disclosure campaign, do you see legacy media like NBC and CNN and the BBC catching up? Or will they always play second fiddle to new media?
So that's a really great question. And being what I would consider to be part of the new media in this modern era, in this digital environment of the 21st century, maybe I'm kind of qualified to talk about this. Let me predicate this by saying that I really respect traditional media, and I try to operate essentially in a similar fashion, in the sense that you have to undergo proper vetting. You have to use the same resources. When you have a source that wants to be anonymous, you have to respect that, but you always also want to try and encourage them to come onto the record. There are a lot of standards of journalism that I think must always be maintained in order to have credibility, sincerity, honesty, transparency, accuracy. But all that said, the media environment is obviously changing too. There may be ways that you can approach this topic that traditional media won't. For instance, most traditional media outlets wouldn't even cover those kinds of stories. Right. A lot of the issues that we're seeing right now, the effort has been led not only by, I think, new media outlets, smaller digital publications, but also, I think, a lot of elected officials who are following that narrative, which shows the importance and the influence that they do potentially have. And then you see these elected officials saying, well, people, and this is really their job, we are elected, so we have to represent our constituents. But our constituents are reporting on things that some in the media seem to think that there is this barrier, imagined or otherwise, that we can't report on things that come from outside that circle, beyond that barrier. But our constituents are talking about it. These outlets, unconventional though some of their methodologies are, they're reporting on these things. So let's look at this, let's pay attention. And the fascinating thing we've seen is that, as you mentioned with the UAPDA, right, we have literally seen members of Congress and the Senate paying attention to this public narrative, and that's influencing policy.
Well, for what it's worth, I think it's important to realize that, again, this is a bipartisan effort, and it's also a nonpartisan issue. And what we need, especially, is media being good and good faith in everything they do. We have science behind us, and we have this sort of grassroots journalism / activism going on here. So I think we're in a good place, and we have so much behind us now, where it's just like, well, whether legacy media chooses to come on the train or not, it's going to happen regardless, is the feeling I have.
Certainly. Well, we find ourselves in Huntsville, Alabama, not a few miles from a standing Saturn V booster stack. And as you were saying, at the Rocket City Tavern just a few years ago, you had Travis Taylor, Jay Stratton, David Grush, a number of whistleblowers sitting together and discussing the UAP issue. Surely with your access to these whistleblowers and in your previous reporting, you must have had a real aha moment talking to some of these people. When did it become the most real for you? What was your dramatic experience?
I will share one with you. I was actually sitting right here on this patio back in 2022. There was an intelligence official I was sitting here having coffee with. I won't name that individual right now out of respect to him. But I was talking with them about one of the most intriguing pieces of footage, which is the USS Nimitz footage for 2004. Chad Underwood had captured that. He was a weapons systems officer of the FA-18 Super Hornet that had gone out after the famous Dietrich and Fravor encounter. And he actually filmed them with the Answer targeting flight, which Radiance Technologies, again, one of our local boys right here, companies, they actually had developed that. And I thought, that's really intriguing footage to me. It really does seem to show a craft that's consistent with what the pilots all said that they saw. And my question to that intelligence official was, obviously you can't divulge specifics about investigations that are ongoing right now. But if you can just indicate to me, do you have similar cases of narrative that are comparable to that footage? And again, the immensity, I think we would say, of a high-profile military encounter that multiple witnesses and, again, naval officers experienced, like the Nimitz case. Do you have similar cases that are that good? He kind of looked at me and goes, oh yeah, we got some good cases. Of course. And it was a simple response, but it really kind of outlined for me. We have stuff that's that good and maybe better, and there are many of them. Again, what we don't see here on the outside very well may be just, or rather, all that we see on the outside is the tip of the iceberg. And if we could see the rest of the iceberg under the water, I think we would all probably have a much broader perspective on this phenomenon. Why there are military officials who now take it so seriously, and again, why there are such efforts to try and gauge this phenomenon and its implications.
It is telling that the hottest piece of evidence we're talking about is 20 years old.
Yeah.
And therefore, the things that are in fact the most compelling today are still active investigations and still active intelligence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just want to say, podcasts like yours are really important. What's happening at the moment is a lot of what should be being covered by mainstream media isn't.
Right.
And what's interesting is, I'm finding, as I'm sure you are, there's an audience out there that want this stuff covered. They really do. Hundreds, thousands of people, millions of people. There's enormous numbers of people are basically saying they want this covered, and they recognise there's a wisdom of the crowd. They recognise it needs to be covered. So, good luck to you guys.
So thank you so much for your time and lovely meeting you.
I'd love to meet you too.
Oh, we appreciate you so much. We don't want to take up more of your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Just thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Indeed.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we just spent the entire weekend, interviewing some of the world's leading disclosure figures here.
Cut.
We spent an entire weekend interviewing some of the world's leading disclosure figures here in Rocket City.
Yeah, I'm still recording for that reason.